Welcome to this explainer. Today we are diving straight into the complex, data-driven reality of asylum migration to Western Europe. We're going to be contrasting the bustling, familiar streets of Paris with the distant realities of origin countries, like Nepal, for example, to really wrap our heads around the incredible data we're about to explore. So let's just jump right in.
Okay, let's start with a really staggering data point just to ground our analysis today. Between 1980 and 1999, which, was a two-decade period of intense global displacement, France alone received 581,860 formal asylum applications. Just think about that number for a second. That is nearly 10% of the roughly 6.3 million total applications made to all of Western Europe during that exact same time frame. And remember, that number only represents the formal requests, so it's actually excluding anyone who didn't officially file.
Now, a massive influx like that naturally leads to a really pervasive and often highly politically charged question. I mean, look at the diverse backgrounds of the people migrating, from a family in Nepal all the way to a street vendor in Paris. It makes people ask, are these individuals simply bogus refugees? Are they actually just economic migrants seeking a better paycheck and exploiting humanitarian channels to get into wealthy Western nations? Well, we need to contrast this bogus refugee myth with the actual empirical reality. And to do that, we're going to be analyzing a rigorous, incredibly comprehensive study from the London School of Economics. It was authored by Dr. Eric Neumayer, and it meticulously tested the actual data-backed determinants of asylum migration. To solve this conceptual puzzle, here is our roadmap for today. 1. The bogus refugee myth. 2. The asylum calculus. 3. The costs of staying. 4. Facilitating the journey. 5. The determinants matrix. And 6. The complex reality.
All right, starting with Section 1, the bogus refugee myth, the origin of a label.
Moving right along to Section 2, the asylum calculus, weighing the journey. So, according to academic theory, the choice to migrate isn't just some arbitrary whim. It is fundamentally a literal cost-benefit analysis made under immense pressure. Academics call this utility-optimizing behavior. It sounds super clinical, right? But think of a family in rural Nepal. They have to meticulously and desperately weigh the cost of staying in their origin country against the absolutely staggering financial and physical costs of migrating to a destination like France. You can really see that literal cost-benefit analysis happening here. A person has to weigh the immediate threats of staying at home, which, could be total economic ruin or imminent physical danger, against the massive friction, the huge geographic distance, the cultural barriers, and the pure physical danger of moving to a totally foreign land. Leaving your home requires immense courage, or, honestly, immense desperation. Let's look closer at that in Section 3, the costs of staying. What pushes people out? The data absolutely confirms that economic hardship plays a statistically significant role here. For instance, in developing nations like Nepal, poor living standards or deliberate economic discrimination against ethnic minorities drop the opportunity cost of staying to practically zero. Basically, when people are systemically prevented from surviving economically, they are overwhelmingly pushed to leave. But, and this is absolutely crucial, the push isn't just about money. Human rights violations, dissident violence from non-state actors, and civil war fundamentally dismantle the viability of staying. The LSE study proves that these specific political factors are massive, verifiable drivers of migration to Western Europe. Oppression directly correlates with asylum flows. Okay, Section 4, facilitating the journey, lowering the friction. Now, the LSE study revealed some highly surprising facts regarding what allows people to actually make this journey. Geographical proximity matters, obviously, but so do networks. If a community from Nepal already has a diaspora in France, that existing network massively lowers the friction for others to follow. But here's the crazy part. Sudden shocks, like famines, natural disasters, or even historical colonial ties, they actually do not reliably lead to European asylum claims. So why is that? Well, the reason for this totally counterintuitive data is that fleeing across continents requires immense resources. Short-term shocks, like earthquakes or sudden famines, usually result in massive internal displacement within a country, or migration to immediately neighboring developing countries. Reaching Western Europe requires a level of sustained preparation and capital that sudden, catastrophic crises simply do not allow for. Which brings us to Section 5, the determinants matrix, compounding factors. When you look at the data, this strict dichotomy between an economic migrant and a political refugee is largely false. the empirical data shows a really complex mixture of motives. Poverty directly overlaps with state failure and human rights abuses. These are compounding push factors. Persistent episodes of violent conflict destroy economies, just as collapsing economies can trigger civil unrest. You simply cannot neatly separate the two in the real world.
And finally, Section 6, the complex reality, policy implications.
The UNHCR actually hit the nail on the head way back in 2000 when they noted, many people leave their home countries for a combination of political, economic, and other reasons. This mixture of motives is one factor creating a perception of widespread abuse. Because these combined motives often define neat, narrow legal categories, it frequently leads to unjust public skepticism. And that very bogus label we started exploring today.
So I want to leave you with this thought. If the empirical drivers of asylum are deeply rooted in autocracy and systemic failure in places like Nepal, how can destination nations like France proactively help solve these crises at their source, rather than just treating the symptoms at the border? It's a profound question of long-term global stability. Thank you so much for joining this explainer, and keep questioning the data.